example, did the police engage with the organizers that day? Were they in constant communication with the organizers that day? Why did the police resort to opening fire of the water cannons and the tear gas? How many tear gas canisters in total were fired that day? And then, what is the breakdown of their deployment? How many tear gas canisters were fired, at what time, at which location? What was the need to physically assault members of the crowd and those who were already arrested? What was the need and the reason why members of the media were prevented from doing their jobs? Why were their recording equipment interfered with? These are all questions that require answers. I ask you to look at things in perspective. What is the consequence of the crowd having broken through the outer police barriers that day? What is the worst case consequence of the crowd pushing through the police lines? The consequence is that you have about 100,000 people gathering on Dataran Merdeka and sitting there for another hour. That is the consequence of having the police barriers broken. It was not as if people were wanting to storm a sensitive government facility or a military installation. So where is the balance? Ask that question. The government, the authorities have been saying for the last month or the last 2 months that they have to balance between national security and human rights. They must strike a balance between those two. That's what the authorities have been saying. So we ask this question: what is the national security consequence of allowing peaceful civilians to gather and sit in a padang for 2 hours, compared to the consequence of the police firing chemical-laced water and shooting tear gas at a peaceful crowd, assaulting members of the public and media? Where is the balance? Where is the thought that was given to the respective consequence of actions? The monitoring team of the bar that day observed that there was no consideration or weighing up of this balance. We also observed that disorder, public disorder, only broke out after the police mobilized and started to fire their tear gas into the crowd. And the police were arresting people, some of whom were wanting to leave. So we have reports of people who were making their way to the LRT station so as to go back, and they were arrested. I give an example of a member of the Malaysian bar who was arrested because on his way to take the train home.
And then I reach Vishal of Pelapor.
Okay, the Vice President, Mr. Christopher Leong, and I were actually at Dunbera just before 1 hour before the gas canisters were fired. Let me tell you this is the view from the ground. Right, we were there. This is not anecdotal evidence. It's not what we heard of anybody else. We were somewhat 200 meters away from the initial barricade, right? The outer barricade of Dataran Merdeka, not the inner barricade, the outer barricade. This is what we saw. This is what happened. Water cannons and the gas canisters were fired directly into the crowd. They were not fired in front to make the crowd disperse, but directly into the crowd. What was the crowd at that time? The crowd was nothing less than 5,000 people in an enclosed area in Jalan Tukar Abdul Rahman. You know Jalan Tukar Abdul Rahman? The very old street, narrow alleyways, almost no escape route. That was obvious to anybody. The police would have seen that, anybody would have seen that. Yet, almost 200 meters. I'll tell you why we know it's 200 meters, because that's where we were, as observers. Almost 200 meters into Jalan Tukar Abdul Rahman, and it landed next to us, once next to me, twice next to the Vice President. And we were overcome by the fumes. So this was not an act of dispersal, this was an act of shooting water cannons and gas canisters into a peacefully assembled crowd directly. What happened? Well, you can imagine what happened. People were trapped. There was no way to escape. There was a stampede. We were the victims of a stampede. Surely this would have been known to the public authorities. The authorities would have known that. People were injured. By the grace of God, not many were injured as much as could have happened. But people were injured. There was choking, there was confusion. As you ran to the right, you had people coming and saying, no, they are firing on the other side. And it's true. As the first few volleys went, we kept hearing more and more volleys. Now, is this an attempt to disperse the crowd? You have to ask yourself that. The evidence does not show that this was an attempt to disperse the crowd. Dispersal means a few volleys, it stops and people disperse. These people were not charging back, they were running away, and yet the volleys came again and again. There was, on that day, no respite. Now, it's a very sad day. It was a very sad day for us, all right? Observers there, the lawyers were in the midst, because we were all put in harm's way. And make no bones about that. Everybody was put in harm's way. And is that the role of the police? To put members of the public in harm's way? You ask yourself that. I think the rest of what I would have had to say, the President and the Vice President have said, so I'm not going to have that. I'll be quite happy to take the President.
Lawyers from the Bar Council Legal Aid Centre arrived at Pulau Pol at approximately 5:40 p.m. And until the last batch of protesters were released at around 5 a.m., the lawyers were not allowed to see the protesters. None of the police officers at the gate would even speak to the lawyers to try to even negotiate some sort of access. Instead, we were told that they were waiting for orders from Bukit Aman to allow the lawyers in. We requested, we demanded, we even pleaded with them, but all these fell upon deaf ears and a row of stonewall silence. But as the President had mentioned, members of the media were allowed in, Sohakam were allowed in, but not the lawyers. At one stage, the police even tried to erect a barbed wire behind the Pulau Pol gates, but they decided not to. And also attempts to confirm whether certain persons were inside, whether they were detained in Pulau Pol, were again met with silence and inaction. Yesterday, the IGP in his press conference claimed that lawyers were free to see the detainees. We are here to say that this is not true. There are in excess of 20 members of the bar outside of Pulau Pol that night, with the family members, including the Vice President and the Treasurer of the Nation Bar. Yet, we were treated as if we did not exist. This was a clear breach of Section 28A of the CPC, and also a blatant disregard of Article 5 of the Federal Constitution. In the days leading up to Bersih 3.0, we heard how the authorities told us that we should follow the law. So to me, it is very, very ironic that when it came down to it, the police themselves blatantly disregarded the law and the rights of the detainees. This is also another element that has been lost in the discourse post Bersih 3.0. No one seems to be talking about this. But denial to legal representation, to me, is as important as excessive police force. You have to remember, protests do not occur every day. But every day, people are arrested. And if this is the attitude that the police is taking, then we certainly have a problem, because we now have the authority disregarding clear provisions of the CPC and clear rights under the Federal Constitution. That's all.
I think, Shah, when we were present outside Pulau Pol, two families, parents, came to Pulau Pol because they were told that their children were arrested. Minors, the children who were minors, that means below the year of 18 years old, were arrested and possibly brought to Pulau Pol. So these parents came to the gate at Pulau Pol and asked the police officers if the police officers could confirm whether or not their child, who was a minor, who were minors, were being detained at Pulau Pol. Police refused to entertain them. We do not understand such insensitivity.
You have to also remember, the last minor that was released was about 3 a.m. We do not understand why about 4 a.m. So we don't know why they cannot process these minors earlier, because they were in there, they were without, there were welfare officers in there, but again they were denied legal representation. Again, this is a breach of the Child Act and also the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And to let them be in there without any legal representation, without any news from their parents, to their parents, is, to me, is unacceptable.
I don't have much to add, except that I confirm again that for close to 12 hours, we were waiting outside the barricades at Pulau Pol. And you have to visualize hundreds of family members waiting outside, getting reports of people being taken to a general hospital, people being beaten up and injured, and not knowing whether your family member is inside or not. I think Chris mentioned the children. At about 1 a.m., a family member came. A 71-year-old Chinese lady was missing, and the police again just refused to even talk to us. Refused to even acknowledge and check their list whether a 71-year-old Chinese woman was in custody at the time. And there were 3 or 4 family members waiting outside just to confirm whether she's on the list. Not whether when she's coming out and all that. Is she on the list of those detained at that time? No response whatsoever.
Response, but rather late in the day where I had to communicate with Dato' Kuchinhua to actually find out such ground level information a bit late in the day. So these are things that the police has to get its act together and become a bit more engaging with the community and the public. And I think before I just show you a short video and some photos to explain what we just said. So far as the organizers are concerned, and I think there are lessons also to be taken away from what happened on Saturday, and that is the marshals ought to remain on the ground for as long as there are people still participating in the rally. And one of the problem areas, of course, is Jalan Tun Perak, where the participants remain there till quite late in the day. And notwithstanding, Choi Joo-ming was there to try to persuade them. Really, I think the organizers ought to have kept a few marshals in that area in order to calm the protesters and then request for them to disperse. So moving forward, I think firstly, whilst it's heartening to hear the IGP and Prime Minister say they will investigate, we hope that whatever investigations there are, it will be done in a transparent way and the findings made public. Unfortunately, we really don't know what processes took place so far as the internal police investigations about Bersih 2.0. Apart from the Sohakam inquiry, which clearly has shown there were certain weaknesses and wrong practices in the use of tear gas and water cannon. And an acknowledgement by the police that Bersih 2.0 was peaceful, contradicting all the immediate post-Bersih 2.0 reports. So what we'd like to see is greater transparency and disclosure of investigation by the police. Secondly, I think there ought to be closer consultation between proposed demonstrators or proposed demonstrations and the police. And We don't have to reinvent the wheel. All the guidelines are there in these Zohakam inquiry reports. So all that is needed is for the authorities to look at these reports. Okay. This shows the drop-off video first jalan